Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terry Cole Show. I am so excited that you are hanging out with me today. I want to start this episode with a question. How are you at resolving conflict in your relationship? Do you avoid conflict at all costs? Do you communicate indirectly by rolling your eyes or by slamming a door with a heavy sigh, perhaps, to express your displeasure rather than actually using words? Well, if you are nodding your head yes, then this episode is for you. I'm interviewing my friend, Jayson Gaddis, who has a brand new book out called Getting to Zero: How to Work Through Conflict in Your High Stakes Relationships. And I love this book. It is a handbook, basically a step-by-step guide of how you can really work through the ruptures and the conflicts in your relationship to create a deeper, more satisfying relationship. So I hope that you enjoy this episode of the Terry Cole Show with Jayson Gaddis as much as I enjoyed interviewing him. I'm so excited to welcome Jayson Gaddis back to the Terry Cole Show because Jayson is a frequent flyer at this point. So Jayson, welcome back.
Thank you, Terry. Good to be here.
I'm so excited. You literally just released a brand new book 2 days ago. So let's talk a little bit about what inspired you to write the book.
Well, like a lot of us, my inspiration comes from, climbing out of the ashes of some kind of painful journey. And I had in my life, a lot of unrepaired conflicts that went south, fistfights, just a lot of gnarly aggression and silence in my life. And I just see it really tripping people up here. And, I wanted to help. And so this is my attempt to give people a very user-friendly guidebook on how do we resolve conflict together.
You really had me at I'm happy to say that I actually got an early copy of the book, and then I was able to write a blurb for the book from a
Amazing
psychological
blurb.
point
Yep.
of view.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. But the book is really, it's not just amazingly interesting. It is that, but it really is a handbook. And I think that this is what's missing with a lot of stuff about conflict and conflict resolution is we actually need to understand what does it look like when we are attempting to repair a rupture? How do we do it? The title itself, Getting to Zero: How to Work Through Conflict in Your High Stakes Relationships, because those are the ones that they're the hardest to work through.
Yeah.
So your own life experience got you basically to this point. And I said at the top of the show that you've got a relationship school, and you and Ellen, I'm always watching your Instagram stories and you guys when you're doing things together, because there's something so great about watching you do it in real life. So for you and for everyone listening, what are the biggest problems that people run into with figuring out conflict in their relationships?
Yeah. And like you said, it's the hardest in our high stakes ones. It's the marriage, it's the business partnership, or it's family often is the hardest place here. So yeah, we gotta find our way. And I think the first thing we have to do is change our mindset that conflict is a problem and it's bad and should be avoided and scary and it's really uncomfortable. And it is scary. It is uncomfortable. And the more we avoid it though, the more we create inner conflicts in ourselves because we're holding back our truth and withholding a lot of stuff we could say for fear of upsetting the other person or getting into more conflict. And it's all understandable. I get it. And if we can start seeing conflict as a doorway instead of just a door that's closed with a lock on it, I think we're going to, move a lot forward. So if we can start with the mindset, change our mind about it, open our eyes to it as being this amazing growth opportunity and an opportunity to learn about the other person and myself, then, I think we're going to start off really well.
So let's start with defining. How do you define conflict?
I define conflict as a rupture, a disconnection, or an unresolved issue between two people. And sometimes it's silence and distance for 10 years. That feels like conflict in our bodies and our hearts, and it feels terrible. So I include conflict in that. It's not just like you and I arguing, right? It's a wider definition than that.
The expansive definition, I have to say, I was reading something that you wrote on Instagram the other day. It was some, or no, you did a video, and it directly impacted my behavior that day with Vic.
Oh, wow.
We'd had a thing where it was like we were disagreeing about something.
Yeah.
And I realized when you were talking about coming back together, that the importance of coming back together after a distancing, because again, a lot of us, if you're conflict avoidant, you don't realize, of course, you can't completely avoid conflict. It's not possible, but you do it in different ways. You distance yourself, you shut down, you move away from the other person. And I have to say, you were talking about ways to come back towards the other person. And I literally went right out to Vic's studio and I was like, hey, babe, can you take a break? And we just finish talking about what we were talking about. And I was like, tell me how you feel and what you think. Like, it really impacted me. I was like, wow, this shit is good, Jayson. Cause
Nice.
I've had a lot of therapy. And I was like, yeah, man. So moving into, will you define zero for us? Because that's the title of the book. What does it mean getting to zero?
Yeah. So zero is the happy place where we feel good and connected again. And that's where most of us want to be in our life. We want to be at zero with the people that matter most to us. And you think of it like a scale, like a thermometer or something. Anything above zero starts to feel conflictual. So 1, 2, 3, and especially if we get up above a 5, we're now in usually the back part of our brain and we're less coherent and we say and do stupid shit. And a 10 is like, we're off the rails. So most of us don't get to a 10 in sort of ordinary conflict, but it does happen. And the goal is for us is to just, let's have our baseline be a 0 that feels really good to us. And let's not tolerate anything above that. Because as you know, being a therapist, so many people grew up in violent families or families where disconnection was the norm. And their baseline is like no talking and absence of connection, which is actually stressful on a low grade level. And that's probably more like a 3 or 4. So I'm challenging the reader and the listener here to set a new 0 and at least get on the same page about what 0 even means. You don't even have to use the term 0. Just be like, hey, can we get back to our baseline, our good spot? And that's going to require some effort, on both parties.
But I love the idea of inviting us to change our minds, to sort of up level what it can be. Because just because you grew up in a home where people, let's say stonewalling each other and not talking could go on for weeks or months or whatever,
Right.
That is absolutely stressful. And it doesn't have to be your life, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Which
it
is
doesn't
why,
have to be your life.
Yeah.
And just because that's the pattern in my brain and my nervous system that I do that thing, like I call them the disconnectors, like we posture, we collapse, we seek, or we avoid. Typically, most of us fall into those 4 categories. And that's the rut that's in our patterning when we get stressed, is we go to one of those 4 places. And again, it's fine in the short term, but we've got to learn how to create a new groove. And we can do that in a mutual partnership. We can do it with awesome friends and start to learn to recover maybe a little sooner, like a team.
All right. So say those 4 positions. So when people are in conflict, you said they take 4 positions. Tell us what they are.
Yeah. So I call them the conflict types. And anytime we feel threatened, we disconnect from that 0 place and from the good place into a place of self-protection and defense. And so we posture, or we collapse, or we seek, or we avoid.
Yeah. And can you do all of those things at different points?
Yeah, most of us can. And we tend to orient or gravitate towards one primary default. Like I'm more of a seeker and a posturer. I'm fine. The posture is like, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Like, come on, get over it. Mm-hmm. And then seeking is like, it feels actually bad to me to be disconnected. So I pursue my wife and try to attempt to repair because I don't like the feeling of disconnection. So I tend to orient to those. And of course, she's more wired to the other 2, right? Which is more of the avoiding and the collapsing. And so we often find ourselves partnered with someone who does the opposite that we do.
So what do you make of that with attachment stuff?
It comes from attachment. So in chapter, I can't remember, early on in the book, I talk about the relational blueprint. Mm-hmm. And the seek avoid dynamic is very much an attachment dynamic. And it's often below people's awareness. And so I often don't even use the word attachment because sometimes it's right over people's head, but seek and avoid, people understand, oh, I'm more of a seeker and I'm more of an avoider, but
Right.
they're very much in alignment with the ambivalent anxious person and the anxious and avoidant person.
Yep. So, because of course we attract someone who will make us absolutely crazy
Yeah.
because they have the opposite style. So you talk in the book about inner conflicts and outer conflicts. So can you say more about that?
Yeah, totally. When I avoid conflict with you, as I said earlier, I'm creating an inner conflict. And growing up, most of us created some kind of inner conflict in our family of origin because we got the message that our true self wasn't welcome. For example, I'm sensitive, emotional, empathic. That's kind of more my true nature. But I got the message from my environment that that wasn't cool and wasn't welcome in the home or in the boy code and the playground. And so I learned to put a mask on and act tough. And I call that the strategic self. So I learned to have a bunch of strategies covering over my true self because I didn't want to get hurt, shamed, rejected, or abandoned. And so we trade our authentic self-expression for connection. And that's an inner conflict. And for a lot of us, it lasts a lifetime if we don't find our way back home to who we actually are. And I think conflict is one of the fastest ways we can come back to who we are because we're being asked and invited or forced or whatever to be ourselves and to tell the truth about what's actually occurring inside.
All right. So those who are listening, who are having difficulty with conflict in their relationship, let's talk about the top 5 most common relationship conflicts. Like, what are they about?
Yeah. So there's surface fights, there's resentment fights, there's value difference fights, there's projection fights, and there's security fights.
All right. So can you go through them?
Yeah, sure.
Surface fights. What are they?
Yeah. Surface fights, the simple stuff. Your man gives you a look and he rolled his eyes or something, and that it starts to feel pretty surfacey. Mm-hmm. But upon closer examination, usually a surface fight's got a tributary to something deeper, often a value difference or a security fight or what was the other one? Or a resentment. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these are just the other 4 disguised in a surface fight. But if a surface fight, we often say, oh gosh, you're overreacting. If someone feels like someone's overreacting, usually it's because there's more to the story. There's a historical piece from my childhood. There's a resentment between us we've never been able to get through. There's an emerging value difference that, I'm kind of scared because you believe this and I believe that. Or maybe you've got 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and that has me on edge. And all of our fights are kind of ultimately about that because I want you here and you're not sure if you want to be here. So that's where I'm kind of weaving them all together. But a lot of us get stuck on not knowing what we're even fighting about. So I thought it was useful just to define 5 common types of fights that we get into as a way just to, help people kind of orient it. Wait, what are we actually fighting about? What category does it fall in?
I love that so much because I think that the overwhelm that can happen, especially if being in conflict is very threatening to you, that you literally don't know what the problem is, but you want the problem to stop.
Yeah.
And I think that what you're inviting us to do in the book itself and teaching us, because it's not just an invitation, it's actually really a handbook of how to go about it, is to realize that through the conflict is on the other side of working through conflict is where real intimacy lives.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get so much closer. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, there are these roadblocks to connections, like things that like get in the way of us making the connection. Can you talk a little bit about that so people can sort of see themselves in this?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've heard you talk about a few of these as well. Some of the extreme forms of road blocking are gaslighting and stonewalling. Mm-hmm. That's on the extreme end. Subtle other ways we roadblock are we hope and pray that the conflict is going to get better, or we use time as the excuse that, like my parents, just time will sort of take care of it. I'll just go to sleep and I'll wake up and hopefully be better tomorrow. And if not, I'm not better tomorrow, I'll be at least better in a week. And that kind of works, right? It's sort of your nervous system does sort of change over a week and you sort of start forgetting. But I like to think the body doesn't forget. So, and I'm being sensitive dude here. I don't forget, man. I fucking don't miss a beat in my life. So I like to just have a clear, clear path here. Defensiveness is another one. Compartmentalizing. So I just put it on the shelf and stuff it and hope it, I'm just going to put that over there. And again, there's a time and a place for most of these, especially like compartmentalizing. It's like, we don't always have time to deal with it. If you're on a team, and you have an issue with a teammate, you sort of suck it up and like put it on the shelf so you can play the game, right? And then maybe later you can address it.
What do you think? Can we dive a little bit more deeply into defensiveness?
Yeah.
Because what I've found in my practice and in teaching, and people write into me all the time, either that they can't stop being defensive, or that most of the time it's them complaining that their partner is extremely defensive. And when they come with a grievance, then the partner will like want to tit for tat them.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, you're mad that I didn't listen now, but you didn't listen 2 days ago when I blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So can you just, what is your deep dive on defensiveness? How can we get better at it? Is there a way that we can try to help our partner be less defensive in the way we approach them?
Yeah, it's an important question. I'm curious what you would say as well here, Terri. I think I notice in myself and the people I work with that defensiveness often is a kind of posture over some type of fear or insecurity or hurt. And if we can slow it down, particularly after the defensiveness, like defensive people have a hard time slowing down their defensiveness in the moment. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can work on it over time for sure. But one of the things you can do if you're listening and you're defensive, or someone defensive, is soon after you can start getting curious about your defensiveness. Like, God, why am I so defensive? What is driving this? And what if I was scared or hurt? And what am I really protecting here? And for a lot of men, I'll speak for myself and some men, we can get very defensive if we feel like we did something not right. Like there's a right and a wrong, way to do something. And if you start giving me the message, Terri, that what I said wasn't right, or something I did in the house wasn't on point or something, I might start feeling judged and insecure, and then I might get defensive and push back with you. But again, if we slowed it down, I would see that I grew up with a dad who was critical, and therefore I felt the need to defend myself and be on edge because I didn't feel accepted for who I am. So anytime you give me constructive feedback, it hits that button and I go right to this posture in defense, right? So I think we can just bring more and more awareness to it, and even some compassion and kindness toward ourselves and our partners who are defensive, if there's an understanding there of like, gosh, I kind of know why you get so quick to defend, because man, you grew up with that family and this happened and that happened.
Yep.
Then we can start to, even have a sense of humor about it, because it can get pretty loud, the defensiveness.
Yeah. I think what you're saying, yes, slow it down for sure. That is, what I would say as well. But I love the idea that you're bringing in about having an understanding and compassion. And I think that when we want to be at zero, when we want our baseline functioning to be at zero, as you would say, to be at a good and healthy place, this requires us jointly to be a part of the solution and to see it as it's you and me against this conflict that we're having. Yeah. It's not you and me against each other.
Yeah. Amen to that. Really well said. That could be underlined 5,000 times, right? It's let's look at this together as a team. Let's stand shoulder to shoulder looking at the problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because it puts you in such a different place. So talk a little bit, if you would, about relational blueprints.
Yeah. So, as you know, we all sort of come into this world with some kind of relational template, and it gets molded over years of being with usually our family or whoever the caregivers are and the people around us the most. And that's the download we get. And it just sort of looks like a blueprint if we were to map it out, like, oh, this is kind of how you do relationships. And it can become uncomfortable to know that that's how you're going to relate to people in your high stakes relationships later in life, especially under stress. It's moldable, it's changeable later in life. The brain's plastic. We know this now, and it's not like our destiny doesn't have to be a nightmare because we grew up in a difficult family. We can actually work to learn through your podcast, mine, and this actually learning about relationships. We can learn to change that blueprint. But it basically starts to set the tone for how we're going to do it later. And to dumb it down really simply, it's the seek avoid dynamic. That under stress, what happened as a kid is, did the conflicts get repaired? Was mom or dad or the caregiver near enough by, and did they make attempts to try to reconnect with you? Or were they too busy, too drunk, too unavailable, too violent, and it just never got repaired? Well, that's going to put a kid's nervous system on, pretty permanent like watch. And then they're going to have a difficult time later in life. So relationally, unless again, they start learning how. So what's cool about the Relational Blueprint is we can, reading this book, reading your book, et cetera, we can start to change how we do this.
What's so hopeful about this book, and I love it so much because I personally, I came from a conflict averse family system.
Yeah.
And so the way that you write, sharing your own story, like there was so much in this that I felt so identified with, but so hopeful that someone can pick up this book right now. And this is a step-by-step guide of how to change your mind about conflict, about what it means, even if what you learned in childhood is that it is to be avoided at all costs.
Right.
The cost is too high, actually, to avoid it. And I promise you, this is a skill set that you can learn. But I love, Jayson, I'm so excited for you, and I'm so excited for us that we have you. This book is now in the world. You guys can get it everywhere books are sold. Tell people where they can find you, but of course they can buy the book anywhere, right?
Yep. Yeah, you can buy the book anywhere. If you want a few extra goodies, you can go to gettingtozerobook.com. But our main website, relationshipschool.com, is great. That's where the podcast that Terri's been on a number of times, and where you can find all things relational, and particularly this book to help folks.
Just amazing. So I say thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing this hard work, because it is so incredibly needed right now. You guys, you know where to go to get this book. If you are a conflict disaster, well, you can thank me right now. Go get Getting to Zero, How to Work Through Conflict in Your High Stakes Relationships by Jayson Gaddis. Jayson, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I so appreciate you and your big, fat, therapeutic brain.
Thanks, Terri. Always fun to hang and jam with you.
Right on.